Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of Games Like Zelda. Last episode, I kind of reached a point where I wasn't really quite sure what the next game was going to be. And since we just talked about Secret of Mana, why the heck not Final Fantasy Adventure? Now the strange thing about this game is that it's the game that takes place right before Secret of Mana. Or at least it's the Mana game that was released before Secret of Mana. My Japanese is not so good, but in Japan, this game was called Second Densetsu, which means Legend of the Sacred Sword. What is kind of strange about the series in Japan as opposed to here is, in Japan, it's considered a Final Fantasy Gaiden, which is just like a side story. It's basically Square wanted to create a Final Fantasy game but doing an action RPG style. They wanted to go more for something Zelda-like, which you'll see becomes very obvious as you go throughout the game. So they just kind of wanted to create this other series where they're doing something more Zelda-like, but with Final Fantasy elements. So in this game, there are potions, ethers, a lot of Final Fantasy elements. But then the creator, Koichi Ishii, who had been working on Final Fantasy games all along, and he's famous for having been the person who created Moogles, and he created Chocobos, which are very prominent features in Final Fantasy games. He then went on to create this series, and so he developed a lot of ideas that don't really have anything whatsoever to do with Final Fantasy to create this game, Final Fantasy Adventure. And so the title is kind of strange, because originally it went through several title changes before they decided on Final Fantasy Adventure for the US version. Personally, I think that that's a pretty decent title. It kind of gives you an idea of what to expect from this game. And I almost feel like it probably would have been a good idea to hold on to that title for the future Mana games. But I don't know, maybe not, because Secret of Mana kind of really did establish itself as a completely different series from Final Fantasy. There are very few Final Fantasy elements in Secret of Mana. In fact, off the top of my head, I can only think of Moogles is all. But as far as this game, now what's really awesome about this game, it's basically Legend of Zelda upgraded. Everything about it feels extremely Zelda-like to me. Even the way that you move from screen to screen feels very Zelda-like. You go to an edge of a screen, and then it scrolls over, and you're on the next screen. It's not like in modern action-adventure games. It's like the character is the center of focus, and when they move, the whole screen sort of moves along with them. Not so in the original Legend of Zelda, and not so in this. In this, you get to the edge of the screen, and then the screen moves on to a next screen. What's also bizarrely similar to Zelda is just how they set up each of those screens. It's very symmetrical. They're not really going for realism so much as creating symmetrical, interesting paths that you have to maneuver around. This is especially true in the dungeons, where just like in the original Legend of Zelda, you've got one screen room, and then sometimes a door north, south, east, or west, and then you go through that door and the whole screen shifts over to the side. And there are keys that open the doors, switches that you can hit. There's a thing that acts exactly like the hook shot from A Link to the Past. So they're obviously clearly taking their inspiration from Zelda. It's got bombs, a lot of its puzzles are very Zelda-esque. It really feels, in a lot of ways, like this could possibly have been the next logical step from the original Legend of Zelda. What's a little bit different from Zelda is that it actually has a pretty complicated story for a game of that era. And also what really makes this quite different from Zelda is that it is an action RPG, so you do level up, and as you level up you get stronger, more HP. As far as gameplay goes, so as I mentioned, you've got a sword, you also got a variety of other weapons, What's really interesting is that you can charge up your sword. So kind of like in Zelda, you can do a spin attack. A different type of ability that you can do kind of lets you just dash across the side of the screen, attacking every enemy in your way. So that's kind of a lot of fun to play around with, building up those attack points or whatever they are that lets you go ahead and complete those slightly more tricky sword moves. And also what's kind of interesting is that you get a sidekick character who's kind of basically just following you, and this character changes up. You meet a new character, and then you get rid of your old character, and they always have additional abilities that they bring to the table. This one girl can cast a healing spell on you. There are people that do attacks and so on. What's kind of interesting about this game as well is that they've remade it twice since. Only in Japan did they do just a slight graphical upgrade remake, and that was released for cell phones. Unfortunately, we never got that over here in the US. And then afterwards, a few years after that, they went ahead and did a complete remake to sort of bring it up to where the Mana series is, to bring in some current Mana aspects, things like little cactus. Have you ever seen a more adorable cactus? And then they called this game Sword of Mana, but it's still the same basic plot, still the same basic characters, just upgraded, and this was for the Game Boy Advance. I mean, as far as choosing between Final Fantasy Adventure or its complete remake Sword of Mana, there's just this huge nostalgia aspect about Final Fantasy Adventure because it's so much like the original Legend of Zelda that it just kind of feels like it's its own separate entity. So I mean, I feel like it's worth it to play both versions. But if you're not a fan of playing something that dated, then I say give Sword of Mana a shot too. So that's been this week in Games Like Zelda. Next week we're going to feature a game that I think a lot of you are probably very familiar with, and quite a few of you have mentioned. This game is definitely like Zelda. Some have even gone to call it a Zelda clone. So I'm sure you can guess what this game is, and you'll be seeing that next week. Bye, guys.